Welcome to LabMinutes.com and our lab video series in Cisco ISE 1.2. You can find a complete list of ISE video on our website by clicking on the link above and sign up for our newsletters to receive the latest video updates. So what is Endpoint Protection Service, or EPS? EPS is a quick way for you to disconnect and block a host from the network in case you need to for whatever reason, whether it's a malicious host or a user that you want to remove from your network. You sure can identify the port on ISE and then manually shut down from the switch configuration, but that wouldn't stop the user from taking the device and then plugging it to a different port. Now with EPS, it doesn't matter where the device is connected to, as long as the switch is 802.1x enabled and talk back to ISE. ISE makes sure that the user will not be able to reconnect to the network. The concept of EPS is to mark whether it's a device IP or MAC address to be in a quarantine state, and that way we can build a policy, authorization policy, and make sure that an appropriate ACO is pushed out to the device, or even switch the VLAN to a isolated quarantine VLAN so the device no longer has access to the network. Although this feature has been around since ISE 1.1, since I haven't really made a video on this, I figured I'd do one for you guys with this version of ISE. In this video, we will configure EPS with both wired and wireless, and we'll see this feature in action. Now on our network diagram, we have Cisco ISE 1.2, the IPF.102, and the VLAN 32. We also have a wireless LAN controller running version 7.5, the IPF.104. We have a domain controller and certificate authority server Windows 2008 machine at the IPF.40 on the same VLAN. Now for the user VLAN, we have VLAN 64, where we're going to have our domain computer, our test computer, connected on the switch port 19. And that's going to be our test machine for both wired and wireless. As you can see, we also have an access point LMAP1 that's connected to the same VLAN. And we also have a quarantine VLAN, VLAN 63, that is completely isolated with no IP or DHCP server. So that's where we're going to place our quarantine host and make sure that it cannot get to anywhere else. Okay, so let's start off with our configuration. Here is our web interface to our ISE server. By default, EPS is disabled, so the first thing before we can do anything else that we need to do is to enable EPS, and this is under Administration, Settings, and right here for Endpoint Protection Service, go ahead and switch from disable to enable and click Save. And then we need to basically build a foundation as far as our authorization policy. So as soon as the host is marked as in quarantine state, the correct policies will be able to get pushed out or enforced on the particular device. So let's start off with our wired configuration. And the way to do that is by the means of downloadable ACL, as always, with the wired. So policy, we'll go to results. We're first going to create a downloadable ACL that will deny all the traffic. So go under downloadable ACL, we'll click add, and create our own one called LM deny all, and that's just basically deny IP any. Check the syntax and then click submit. Next we're going to create a wired authorization profile, so click add for the downloadable ACL deny all we just created. So we're going to call it wired deny all. And it's going to be DACL, and we're going to choose LM deny all. Okay, so submit. And we're also going to create another authorization profile that's going to switch the user to the quarantine VLAN, VLAN 63. So we're just trying to be modular instead of adding that VLAN IDs as part of the deny all that we just created. We're going to create a separate one. So this one will be called wired VLAN quarantine. Okay, and for the VLAN, you have the choice here to use whether there's ID, which is the VLAN number, or name. So let me bring up the switch real quick and do show VLAN brief so you can see. Okay, so you can see right here we can either enter 63 or quarantine. We're just going to use the name so that way that you can, if you have a large network, you can keep the name consistent, and that way you don't have to have duplicate VLAN IDs across your network. Just the name, so we use the quarantine. And then we'll click submit. Okay, now that we have our authorization profiles, we'll move on to creating or configuring our authorization policies. So under policy, since we have the policy sets enabled from our previous video, we're just going to proceed with that. Although what we really need is the global exception right here. And whether or not you have policies that enable, you will see this exception policies right on top of the page. So for us, I'm going to go ahead and create a rule. And we're going to call it LM wired EPS quarantine. Okay, and for a condition, we first need to match an attribute that will indicate the request being coming from the wired. So we'll create a new condition. And the way to do that, we're just going to use the readers attribute for service type. Actually, it's not it's a NASPort type rather. So let me see if we can find that. So NASPort type right here, attribute value 61, and for wired it's going to be equal to Ethernet. So that will be our first condition. Our second condition, we're just going to add from attribute value, and this is where we're going to look for that quarantine state of the device, and that's under session. Here with the EPS status, and you can see the only option we have here is the quarantine. So we'll select quarantine, and if those conditions are met, we're going to return wired deny all for the downloadable ACL, as well as switching the user to the quarantine VLAN, and that would be wired VLAN quarantine. Okay, so that's done. Don't forget to scroll down and save, otherwise you'll lose your config. So those are for wired. Now we have to repeat the same process for wireless. So let's go back and create our authorization profile, since the traditional controller does not use the downloadable ACL, but instead use name ACL. So let's click add, and this time we're going to call it Vlan deny all, and instead of DACL we're going to use the airspace ACL, and the name of the ACL has to match to the actual ACL that is created on the controller. So we're going to lock into our WISE9 controller. Under security, access control list, here we already have LM deny all in dashes. It's just the basic deny any. Okay, copy and paste, and then submit. And then same thing, we have to create one for returning a quarantine VLAN. So add Vlan VLAN quarantine. And instead of using the name, since the controller doesn't really have a concept of the VLAN name, I just want to show you here under the controller and interfaces. Although there's an interface name, and then we have the interface ID for 63, so you need to make sure that you have the corresponding interface VLAN on that. So here we're just going to do with the ID 63. Okay, submit. Now that we have the authorization profile, we're going to go back and finish off our authorization policy here with under the global exception. So we're going to duplicate below. Instead of wired, it will be Vlan EPS quarantine, and we have to change the NASPort type from Ethernet to match the wireless request coming from wireless. So that would be wireless IEEE 802.11. EPS status stays the same, and here we have to change all of our results, our authorization profile, to use the one that we specifically create for wireless. So that would be Vlan deny all, as well as the Vlan VLAN quarantine. Although it seems to have a typo, you can go back and fix that real quick. Don't forget to save before you move on. It can be easily missed since it's kind of hidden down below. Okay, let me just correct the name real quick, and whatever you modify the name to, it should automatically reflect on the policy that's using it. Okay, so that should be good. Let's go back and make sure that name gets updated, and it did. So that's all the configuration we need on ISE. Next we can move on and start our testing and see how all of these actually works.